welcome. Today we're exploring one of the most disturbing cases in paranormal history, a story that's been locked behind glass for over 50 years, blessed by priests and feared by everyone who's encountered it. This is the real story of Annabelle, and I promise you, it's far more unsettling than anything Hollywood could create. The innocent beginning, forget everything you've seen in the movies. The real Annabelle isn't a pale, cracked porcelain figure with haunting eyes. She's a Raggedy Ann doll, kind with a red yarn wig, button eyes, and a cheerful gingham dress. The kind that sat on countless children's beds throughout the 1970s, radiating nothing but innocent nostalgia. In 1970, a woman purchased this seemingly harmless doll from a hobby shop as a birthday gift for her daughter, Donna, a nursing student living in an apartment with her roommate. Angie, it was meant to be a sweet gesture, a reminder of childhood comfort as Donna navigated the challenges of graduate school. The doll took its place on a chair in their modest apartment, and for a brief time, life continued normally. But within weeks, that normalcy began to unravel. When objects refused to stay still, the changes started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Donna and Angie would leave the doll positioned one way and return to find it had shifted. At first, they dismissed it. Perhaps they'd bumped it, or their memory was playing tricks. But the movements became more pronounced. The doll would migrate from room to room. They'd leave it on Donna's bed in the morning and find it perched on the living room couch by evening, its fabric legs dangling over the edge as if it had walked there itself. Then came the notes. One afternoon, they discovered pieces of parchment paper scattered throughout the apartment, covered in childlike scrawl. The messages were simple but deeply unsettling. Help us and help Lou. The strange part, neither woman owned parchment paper. They had no explanation for where these messages came from or how they appeared in their locked apartment. Lou was a close friend who visited frequently, and from his very first encounter with Annabelle, he'd felt an overwhelming sense of dread. While Donna and Angie were curious about the phenomena, Lou's instinct was primal and immediate. Get rid of this thing. He warned them repeatedly, insisting the doll was evil. But his friends were more intrigued than frightened, and they wondered if perhaps a spirit, a harmless one, was simply trying to communicate. They decided to seek answers. The mediums, deception believing they were dealing with a lost soul. Donna and Angie contacted a spiritual medium to conduct a seance in their apartment. What the medium told them seemed to confirm their hopeful suspicions. According to her, the doll was inhabited by the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had lived on the property before the apartment building was constructed. The child had died there tragically and felt a connection to the two young women. She was lonely, the medium explained, and simply wanted to be loved and feel safe again. The story was heartbreaking. How could they deny comfort to a lost child's spirit? In a moment, they would come to deeply regret. Donna and Angie gave the entity permission to stay, to inhabit the doll, and to remain in their home. They thought they were offering compassion to an innocent soul. Instead, they had just opened the door to something far more sinister. This was the moment everything changed. The nightmares begin. Lou's unease about the doll intensified. Dramatically after the seance, he began experiencing vivid, terrifying nightmares, dreams, where he'd wake to find the doll in his bed, crawling up his body toward his throat. In these nightmares, Annabelle would wrap her fabric arms around his neck and begin to squeeze. He'd try to scream, try to fight back, but found himself completely paralyzed, unable to move or call for help. He could only lie there, suffocating, until he finally jerked awake, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The nightmares occurred repeatedly, growing more intense each time. But what happened next transcended the realm of dreams entirely. One evening, Lou and Angie were alone in the apartment, planning a road trip and looking at maps spread across the living room table. Suddenly, they heard sounds coming from Donna's bedroom, shuffling, bumping noises that suggested someone had broken in. Lou immediately stood up and approached the bedroom cautiously, his heart pounding. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty. But Annabelle, which had been sitting on the bed, was now thrown into a corner of the room, almost as if tossed there by invisible hands. Lou stepped into the room to investigate. As he bent down toward the doll, he felt a sudden, searing pain explode across his chest. He stumbled backward, clutching his torso, and looked down to see his shirt torn open. Beneath it, his skin had been ripped into deep claw marks, 3 vertical slashes intersected by 4 horizontal ones, bleeding and raw. The wounds looked as though they'd been inflicted by something with talons. There was no one else in the room. No animal, no weapon, no explanation. The attack had come from something they couldn't see. Perhaps, even more disturbing than the attack itself was what happened afterward. Within 2 days, the wounds had completely healed, vanished entirely, as if they'd never existed. The supernatural speed of the healing was its own kind of horror, a confirmation that they were dealing with forces that operated outside the laws of nature. This was no lonely child spirit. This was something that could hurt them, something that wanted to hurt them. And it had been growing stronger ever since they'd given it permission to stay. The Warrens arrived terrified and out of options. Donna finally contacted an Episcopal priest, who recognized immediately that this situation was beyond his experience. He reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, paranormal investigators who had already built a reputation for dealing with the most extreme cases of hauntings and demonic activity. When the Warrens arrived at the apartment and heard the full account from Donna, Angie, and Lou, their assessment was swift and chilling. There was no ghost named Annabelle Higgins. In fact, there had never been a child who died on that property. The entire story told through the medium had been a carefully constructed lie. Ed Warren explained it clearly. The doll was not possessed by a human spirit. Instead, it was being manipulated by an inhuman entity, something demonic that had never walked the earth as a human being. These entities, the Warrens explained, don't possess objects. They attach themselves to objects as a way to terrorize people and ultimately gain access to a human host. Everything that had happened, the movement of the doll, the mysterious notes, the escalating attacks on Lou-us, what paranormal investigators call an infestation. It was a staged progression, designed to instill fear and break down the psychological and spiritual defenses of the victims. The entity had lied through the medium specifically to manipulate the women's compassion, to trick them into giving it an invitation into their lives. And Lou, who had recognized its evil nature from the beginning, had been marked as its primary target. The entity wanted to possess a human soul, and it was working systematically to break Lou down, both mentally and spiritually. To make him vulnerable, the Warrens knew they had to act immediately. The Journey, Hamid, and Lorraine performed a blessing over the apartment to cleanse it of the negative energy that had accumulated there. Then Ed made the decision to take the doll with him. It couldn't be destroyed. That might only release the entity fully. And it certainly couldn't be left where it might find new victims. It needed to be contained. Lorraine, who was a gifted clairvoyant, could sense the malevolence radiating from the doll. She refused to sit anywhere near it in the car. Ed placed Annabelle in the back seat and began what would become one of the most dangerous drives of his life. He deliberately avoided highways, fearing that the entity might cause a catastrophic accident at high speed. Even on quiet back roads, the car was plagued with mechanical failures. The power steering suddenly stopped working. The brakes began to fail. The engine stalled repeatedly, nearly causing them to crash into trees and oncoming traffic. It was as if the doll was actively trying to kill them. Finally, Ed had to pull over. He retrieved holy water from his bag, opened the back door, and doused the doll thoroughly while reciting prayers of protection. Only then did the disturbances cease, and they were able to complete the journey home safely. Contained but not dormant once, they arrived at their home in Connecticut. Ed placed the doll in his office, thinking it would be secure there. Immediately, witnesses reported seeing the doll levitate several inches off the chair before dropping to the floor. It began appearing in different rooms throughout the house. Lorraine heard footsteps and strange sounds emanating from the office where Annabelle was kept. A Catholic priest who visited the Warrens didn't take the warnings seriously. He picked up the doll, laughed, and said mockingly, "You're just a doll, Annabelle. You can't hurt anyone." He dismissed the entire story as superstition. On his drive home that evening, the priest was involved in a near-fatal car accident. His vehicle was completely totaled, but he survived. When he called the Warrens afterward, shaken and apologetic, he told them he'd seen the doll's reflection in his rearview mirror just moments before losing control of the car. The Warrens realized that simply keeping the doll in their home wasn't enough. They needed a proper containment solution. They commissioned a special case to be built, not just ordinary glass, but a box made of blessed wood and glass, inscribed with prayers and protective symbols specifically designed to contain demonic energy. This is where Annabelle has remained for over 50 years, locked inside this case in the Warrens Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut. A sign on the case warns visitors, "Warning, positively do not open." The motorcycle incident even behind protective glass, stories of Annabelle's influence have continued. The most famous incident involved a young man who visited the museum with his girlfriend. Despite repeated warnings from museum staff, he began banging on the glass case, mocking the doll and challenging the spirit to do something to him if it was really dangerous. He laughed at the warnings, dismissed the entire story as nonsense, and taunted the entity directly. On their motorcycle ride home that same day, he lost control of the vehicle and crashed head-on into a tree at full speed. He died instantly. His girlfriend survived, but spent more than a year in the hospital recovering from severe injuries. She later told investigators that just before the crash, she'd felt an overwhelming sense of cold dread, as if something malevolent was riding with them. Coincidence? Perhaps, but for those who take these matters seriously, it's simply another example of the dark energy that remains connected to this object energy that can reach beyond the physical confines of the case when provoked understanding the evil what many people misunderstand about the Annabelle case is this: the doll itself is not evil. Raggedy Ann dolls are mass-produced toys. There's nothing inherently sinister about fabric and stuffing. The doll is simply a conduit, a focal point that a malevolent entity has chosen to attach itself to. It's a bridge between their world and ours. Demonic entities, according to those who study these phenomena, are intelligent and patient. They understand human psychology. They know that we respond to things that appear innocent and vulnerable, especially children. By presenting itself as a lonely child spirit, the entity exploited Donna and Angie's natural compassion and desire to help. Once it received their permission to stay, once it had been invited in, its true nature emerged. The progression is almost always the same in these cases. Subtle disturbances that can be rationalized away, followed by increasingly aggressive phenomena, and ultimately direct attacks. The goal is always possession of a human host, with the object serving as the entity's anchor point in our physical world. The warning that remains today: the Warren Occult Museum is closed to the public following Lorraine's death in 2019 and Ed's earlier passing in 2006, but Annabelle remains where she's been for decades, locked in her case, still blessed regularly by priests who continue the protective work the Warrens began, those who've worked closely with the case report that even now they can feel something watching from behind that glass. Cameras set up in the museum have captured strange light anomalies near the case. Visitors who touched the glass before the museum closed sometimes reported feeling suddenly ill or experiencing nightmares. Afterward, the story of Annabelle serves as a powerful reminder about the dangers of dabbling in spiritual matters without proper knowledge or protection. What began as a simple birthday gift, a gesture of love from a mother to her daughter, became a portal for something malevolent, something that required intervention from the most experienced paranormal investigators of their generation to contain the deeper truth. When you watch the Conjuring films and see the creepy porcelain doll with the sinister smile, remember that Hollywood had to create something more visually frightening for audiences. The truth is more disturbing precisely because it's more ordinary. The real Annabelle looks like she belongs in a child's bedroom, like she should be harmless. That's what makes her story so chilling. Evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. Sometimes it comes disguised as something innocent, something nostalgic, something that disarms us completely. The entity attached to Annabelle understood this perfectly. It chose an object that would be welcomed into a home, that would be treated with affection rather than suspicion. Donna, Angie, and Lou were intelligent, educated people, nursing student and her friends, not naive or superstitious. Yet they were systematically manipulated by something that understood exactly how to exploit human kindness. Their experience stands as a cautionary tale about the very real dangers that exist in realms we're only beginning to understand. The Warrens spent their lives investigating thousands of cases, but they always maintained that the Annabelle case was one of the most dangerous they'd ever encountered. The entity attached to the doll was particularly powerful, particularly malicious, and particularly patient in its methods. Final thoughts, whether you believe in the paranormal or not. The Annabelle case raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil and the vulnerabilities in human psychology that can be exploited. Multiple witnesses, credible, educated people, educated phenomena they couldn't explain through conventional means. Physical attacks left real wounds. Mechanical failures occurred with suspicious timing. Accidents happened to those who showed disrespect. Coincidence stacked upon coincidence begins to look like something else entirely. The doll sits in its case today, a relic from a different era, but a reminder that remains relevant. We live in a world where science can explain so much, where rational thinking has illuminated countless mysteries. But there are still corners of human experience where the explanations fall short, where something older and darker seems to persist. Annabelle is one of those corners. and she's still waiting behind that glass. A testament to forces we may never fully understand them, perhaps. Shouldn't try to invite into our lives. The warning on her case remains as relevant today as it was 50 years ago. Positively do not open. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again.